Before we continue our story, please take a moment to subscribe to HFY Aliens Battle. If you're someone who enjoys thrilling sci-fi tales where humanity rises against impossible odds, then you're in the right place. Now, let's continue to our today's story.
At first we thought it was a raid, a skirmish on the edge of our space, nothing more. Our fleets had faced worse. Pirates, border conflicts, a few ancient war machines gone rogue. But this was different. The attack came from beyond the veil, a dark stretch of space no one claimed, no one explored. No patrols, no colonies, no trade routes, just silence. Until it wasn't. A scout station went dark. No distress call, just gone. Then another, and another. Within a single rotation, we lost 17 systems, no survivors, no explanation, just wreckage and static. We sent a response fleet, our finest ships, battle-hardened veterans. They vanished too. That was the beginning. The enemy didn't talk. They didn't negotiate. They arrived like a storm and moved with precision, wiping out our defenses, disabling our communications, and choking our supply lines. Every step they took was calculated, cold, and terrifying. Their ships weren't just stronger. They were smarter, adaptive. Ours would fire, only to find their weapons intercepted, disabled, or worse, reflected. No one had seen tech like that. They hit us in places we didn't even think were vulnerable. Communications hubs, agricultural, moons, medical transports. Nothing was sacred. They weren't here to fight us, they were here to end us. We tried to rally. The United Varnak Alliance, the Rel Dominion, the Coreword Protectorate. Dozens of civilizations stood together under our banner. Together we'd kept peace in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. But none of our peace treaties, none of our protocols prepared us for this. We called them the Vindrax. That was the name one of their prisoners whispered before he died. No one knows what it means. No one knows where they came from. But we all knew what they were, the destroyers. Within weeks they had reached the inner systems. Refugee ships flooded toward the core worlds, bringing horror stories of entire planets harvested, stripped of energy, matter, life. Not conquered, not enslaved, erased. The High Council moved to emergency rule. Every fleet was mobilized. Every colony was put on wartime footing. Our archives were sealed. Old weapons, things we swore never to use again, were dusted off and activated. Still, it wasn't enough. The Vindrax kept coming. For every victory we claimed, they claimed 10. Even our AI-guided armadas were rendered obsolete, hacked, or dismantled before they could react. The stars themselves seemed to flicker as their presence grew. We began losing faith, not just in our leaders, but in our future. Some said we should surrender. Others wanted to abandon the core and scatter into the galactic rim. It didn't matter. No plan held together long enough to execute. And then came the fall of Kilar Prime, the jewel of the southern reach, a fortress planet, a symbol of resistance. We'd poured everything into defending it, shields layered in kilometers, space stations orbiting like armored moons, a fleet of supercruisers waiting in stealth. All of it gone. Not over weeks, not even days. It fell, in 6 hours. When the footage was recovered, it played across every screen in the Empire. Citizens watched as the Vindrax burned through our proudest defenses like paper. And then the feed went black. That's when fear turned into something worse. Despair. With Kalar gone, the Vindrax had a clear path to the capital worlds. And there was no one left to stop them. Our fleets were broken. Our leaders were split. Our allies, once proud and defiant, now whispered of surrender. In the middle of that chaos, with the Empire on its knees, someone in the council whispered an idea so old, so forbidden, no one dared speak it aloud for centuries. It wasn't a plan, it was a last resort, a single word spoken like a curse, a warning passed down from those who had survived the old wars. Human. The High Council chamber hadn't been this full in generations. Representatives from 100 systems gathered, some through holographic projection, others in person, wrapped in the ceremonial garbs of their species. But none of that mattered. today. Not the traditions, not the pomp. Only one thing lingered in the room: fear. They sat in silence as the latest report scrolled across the central display. The Vindrax had bypassed our defensive ring entirely. They were now 2 jumps from Galtoran, the Empire's second-largest capital world. If it fell, the core worlds would be exposed. No walls, no fleets, no time. No one had a solution. Fleet commanders offered numbers. Science ministers spoke of experimental tech that was months, maybe years, from being operational. And the diplomats, they had nothing, because the Vindrax didn't want peace. That's when Counselor Terran of the Ilnari rose from her seat. She wasn't known for speaking often. Her people were old, quiet thinkers who traced their bloodlines back to the first stars. But when she spoke now, her voice carried through the chamber like thunder. "There is one option left," she said slowly, her tone steady. "It is old, dangerous, but it may be the only chance we have." Murmurs filled the chamber, heads turned. Everyone could feel it coming. "You don't mean—" someone began. "I do," she answered, cutting them off. "We summon a human, they—" Chamber erupted. Some laughed bitterly as if it were a cruel joke. Others shouted in protest, slamming fists or appendages on the table. Even the AI diplomat from the machine enclaves emitted a rare burst of static, a sign of extreme discomfort. "No. One's seen a human in centuries," one ambassador roared. "They vanished before the second collapse." "They're extinct," someone else added. "The last confirmed sighting was 500 years ago." "No," Terran said calmly. "They're not extinct, just hidden." Heavy silence followed. Everyone in that room had heard the stories. Stories told in whispers. Tales not found in history records, but in warnings passed from generation to generation. The humans were once part of the old galactic order, briefly, and in that short time they changed everything. They didn't come with great fleets or superior numbers. They didn't need to. They fought with a kind of fury no one understood. Not reckless, not wild, focused, purposeful, terrifying. They adapted faster than any species the galaxy had seen. They reversed engineered enemy tech mid-battle. They destroyed entire fleets using tactics their enemies hadn't even imagined. And then, they were gone. Some said they self-destructed. Others believed they ascended, moved beyond the need for war. But there were always a few, just a few, who insisted the humans had simply chosen to disappear, to sleep, to wait. Counselor Terran was one of them. "I have studied the ancient records," she said. "There are coordinates, places marked as forbidden, abandoned, or erased. One of them holds a stasis vault, and inside it, I believe, a human." The debate raged for hours. Some refused to allow it. They remembered the stories of what the humans had done, not just to their enemies, but to allies who crossed them. They had no emperor, no gods, only rules they wrote themselves. And when those rules were broken, they responded with fire. But desperation has a way of silencing doubt. By the end of the night, the vote passed. It wasn't unanimous, it wasn't proud, but it was final. A small team would be dispatched to the outer rim, to a forgotten world swallowed by time and dust. They were not to inform the public. They were not to bring military backup. This mission had one objective, and one alone: find the human, and wake him up. And somewhere, in the cold corners of the galaxy, something began to stir. The ship they sent was small, fast, and unmarked, designed for stealth, not war. Its crew was hand-picked, 5 specialists from across the known galaxy. Each had sworn silence. Each had studied legends that were never supposed to be true, and each carried the same unspoken fear. What if they actually found one? Their destination was a dead world named Thessar 9. Officially, it didn't exist. It had once been a thriving archive planet, a world built for knowledge, storing centuries of history in massive vaults beneath its surface. But it was abandoned during the Purge Wars. No one had returned since. Even from orbit, Thessar 9 looked haunted. The surface was cracked and barren, its skies perpetually shrouded in gray. Massive archive towers lay in ruins, buried under centuries of dust storms and collapsed data spires. No life, no power, no signals. But their scans found one anomaly. Beneath the southern continent, buried nearly a kilometer underground, something was still active. A low-frequency hum, faint, rhythmic, not mechanical, biological. They landed at the edge of what had once been the central archive spire. Now it was nothing more than jagged stone and shattered metal, pierced by time and gravity. The descent into the underground vaults was slow. Every step triggered long-dormant sensors. Lights flickered weakly to life as if the facility itself were waking up. They passed through corridors lined with shattered stasis pods, each one labeled in languages long dead. Inside were only skeletons, the last librarians of Thessar 9, but the signal drew them deeper. At last they reached the final chamber. It was unlike the rest, intact, sealed and humming with energy. Thick doors stood closed, marked with warning sigils no one could translate. But at the center of the door, a symbol, 2 arms crossed over a circle, the ancient forbidden sign of Terran origin. They entered. The air was cold, stale. But the chamber within was untouched, and there, at the very center, stood a single cryopod. Still lit, still active, still holding him. He looked peaceful, almost too human, taller than expected, broad-shouldered, muscles taut even in sleep. No armor, no weapons. Just a simple dark uniform with faded patches no one recognized. His vitals were stable, body temperature precisely regulated. Heartbeat strong, steady. The lead xenobiologist ran a scan. No decay, she whispered. Stasis integrity, 99.7%. Another scientist swallowed. He's been here for at least 4 centuries. They circled the pod in silence. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. But this was no myth, no fabrication. This was a real human, preserved, waiting. One of the crew, a linguist named Sarai, found a nearby terminal still partially functional. It was protected by an ancient AI system, rudimentary by modern standards, but sophisticated enough to recognize a council passcode. She accessed a single decrypted file, a video log. They watched as an old alien, gray-skinned, weary, appeared on screen. "If you are seeing this," the figure said, "then the galaxy is once again on fire, and your leaders are desperate enough to do what we all feared. You found the last of them, the last soldier of Earth." He looked to the side, into the cryo chamber off-screen. "Do not awaken him lightly. He is not your savior. He is your consequence." Then the screen went black. They stood frozen in place. None of them spoke, not even when the pod's sensors detected their presence and began to rise in temperature. Not even when the heartbeat inside sped up. Not even when the human opened his eyes. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light around him. They weren't glowing. They weren't cybernetic. Just human. Cold and alert like someone who never truly slept. No one moved. The air in the chamber felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Not fear, not aggression. Tension. The human sat up without a word, flexing his fingers as if checking they still belonged to him. He glanced at the 5 figures standing around him, studying each one with unsettling calm. His expression didn't change. No alarm, no questions, just quiet calculation. The team leader, Captain Relek, a seasoned Lethari, officer with battle scars and cyber implants, stepped forward carefully. "Do you understand me?" he asked. The human nodded once. Relek swallowed. "Do you know where you are?" "Not exactly," the man replied, his voice low but clear. "But I can guess. Doesn't look like Earth." That sent a ripple through the team. The name hadn't been spoken aloud in generations. It was like hearing a ghost speak its own name. Sarai, the linguist, stepped forward next. "You were in stasis," she said gently, "for over 400 years. He raised an eyebrow as if that number didn't surprise him. Then he swung his legs over the side of the pod and stood. His movements were fluid, efficient. He wasn't disoriented. He wasn't weak. "Why'd you wake me up?" he asked. Relic hesitated. How do you explain to a man pulled from another era that the galaxy was losing a war against an enemy even machines couldn't understand? "We're being invaded," Sarai answered instead. "The Vindrax. They're wiping out entire civilizations, worlds. We're out of time." The human blinked slowly. "How many?" Relic stepped in. "Thousands of systems already lost, millions dead, more disappearing every day. And your armies?" "Crushed, disarmed, scattered." The human looked around at the blinking consoles, the flickering lights, the layers of dust still clinging to everything. 400 years, he repeated. Then he turned to face the door. "Guess you need help." Relic stared. "You don't even know who they are." "I don't need to." He took a slow breath. "You didn't wake me for politics. You woke me because you've got no other options." The team followed him out of the chamber almost involuntarily. It was like gravity. He didn't ask them to follow, but they couldn't help it. As they ascended toward the surface, he peppered them with questions. Tactical ones. Efficient. What kind of ships do they use? How do they move? Any weakness in their formations? What about atmospheric combat? He didn't ask about the Council. He didn't ask about rewards or diplomacy or why humanity was never mentioned in the modern records. He only asked about the enemy. When they reached the landing bay, the crew offered him armor. He declined. Instead, he walked toward the ship's engineering station and began modifying its systems. None of them understood what he was doing. He rerouted power in unfamiliar patterns, rewrote guidance software by hand. Within an hour, the ship's scanners, once outdated, could track Vindrax warp signatures from 5 systems away. They watched in stunned silence. Relic finally broke the silence. "You haven't told us your name." The human paused for a moment, then gave the smallest of smiles. "Call me. Whatever helps you sleep tonight." He climbed into the pilot's seat. Relic stepped forward. "Where are you going?" "Say hello," he replied. Then the ship lifted off. Within minutes, it vanished into the black. And for the first time in months, the galaxy had something the Vindrax didn't: hope. The Vindrax fleet was already en route to Galtoran. It was a brutal procession. 80 warships in a staggered spearhead formation, their hulls bristling with weapons no known shield could repel. They moved like a tidal wave, carving silence into every system they passed. Resistance had become a joke, survival a myth. And then one of their forward scouts vanished. No distress call, no explosion. Just a flicker, then nothing. They dispatched 2 interceptors to investigate. Those disappeared. 2. Moments later, their long-range sensors blinked to life. A single vessel, small, primitive, moving faster than anything they'd ever recorded. It didn't follow their trajectory. It didn't transmit an ID. And it didn't stop. The Vindrax flagged it as non-compliant. Automated turrets opened fire as it approached their formation. That's when the impossible happened. The projectiles didn't hit. They curved, spiraling off course, intercepted by micro-flare bursts that shouldn't have been detectable, let alone programmable, by a ship that size. Then the vessel responded, not with words, not with negotiation, with action. It streaked straight through the center of the Vindrax formation, leaving behind a wake of electromagnetic interference so intense it crippled 10 vessels in under 5 seconds. Some began to spin. Others crashed into each other. 3 exploded, their cores rupturing like overripe fruit. The Vindrax tried to adapt. They adjusted their formations, deployed drones, brought in heavy capital ships. The human answered by tearing apart their coordination. Not just through firepower, but with precision tactics that hadn't been used in centuries, some thought lost to time. He redirected signal interference to turn their ships against each other, used old gravitational lensing tricks to make sensor ghosts that appeared real. He hacked their targeting systems mid-battle, making them blind in their most vulnerable moments. One Vindrax commander finally broke protocol and sent a live transmission. "What are you?" it hissed. The response came seconds later. Calm, icy. "I'm the reason you should have left this galaxy alone." The feed went dead, and the attacks resumed. This wasn't a fight. It was a statement. The lone ship, smaller than any warcraft the Vindrax had faced, dismantled their fleet from within, one move at a time. He didn't just destroy, he humiliated. When the dust settled, 37 Vindrax ships were gone. The rest were adrift, helpless, their command structure in tatters. And the human. He was already gone, slipped into the void, back into the black, watching, waiting. Word spread fast. At first, the council didn't believe it. They thought it was Vindrax propaganda, some kind of twisted psychological game. But then came the evidence, wreckage, log fragments, tactical patterns that no one but the oldest species had ever seen before, and then the recordings. One captured image was played across the galactic network again and again. A lone human standing on the wreckage of a Vindrax dreadnought, helmet off, looking up at the stars. No sound, no speech, just a silent figure. And the smoking ruin of what was supposed to be an unstoppable empire. The message was clear. Humanity had returned, not as diplomats, not as colonists, not as allies, as a reminder. The Vindrax were not built to feel fear. Their species had evolved through conquest, bred in cold labs, taught from birth that victory was a matter of inevitability. They weren't reckless or emotional. They didn't hate. They erased. And yet, across their battle networks, something unfamiliar began to creep in. It wasn't panic, at first. It was hesitation. After the massacre at Galtoran's Edge, they shifted strategies. They began avoiding solo contacts. Fleet movements became erratic, cautious. They split their forces, widened their formations, trying to prevent another surgical strike from this ghost. But it didn't matter. The human was always 3 steps ahead. He struck from dead systems, abandoned moons, broken asteroid belts. He used the Vindrax's own tactics against them. He jammed communications, corrupted their command chains, forced friendly fire events with precision that bordered on cruelty. They tried to isolate him. But every time they thought they had him, cornered ships exploded, stations blacked out, commanders went silent. He didn't just outfight them, he outthought them. In one sector, he lured an entire Vindrax formation into a gravitational well by faking a distress beacon. In another, he tricked a dreadnought into deploying its shields in reverse polarity, then collapsed its core with a single kinetic round. It became legend almost overnight. The Vindrax began whispering a word they barely knew how to say. Human, they searched their ancestral archives, records they thought were purged long ago. What they found chilled them. Stories from the First War, fragments of old encounters, scouts who never returned, colonies that vanished after a single Terran visit, battles lost not to armies, but to one human, not enhanced, not immortal, just relentless. They were reminded of what their ancestors had sworn to forget. Humans didn't fight for territory. They didn't fight for resources. They fought when pushed. And when that switch was flipped, they didn't stop. The Council, still stunned by the speed of the humans' campaign, finally reached out. They offered him reinforcements, alliances, full command of the remaining fleets. He refused. His message was short. You don't need more soldiers. You need time. Buy it while you can. And then he vanished again. No base, no home, just movement. Attack. Disappear. The Vindrax made one last attempt. They sent their supreme strategist, a being of immense intelligence, backed by centuries of warfare. He built a trap using decoy fleets, false distress calls, and gravitational mines in deep space. It didn't work. The strategist's ship was found days later, gutted, engines removed, floating into the void. No bodies. No black box. Just a single message burned into the hull. You had your chance. That was the moment it shifted. The Vindrax fleet stopped. For the first time since the war began, they didn't advance. They didn't fire. They regrouped and they ran, not tactically, not to reposition, to retreat. Entire sectors were abandoned. Occupied worlds were evacuated overnight, ships scuttled, databases wiped, because they knew. They hadn't awoken a soldier, they'd awoken a warning, and now, across the galaxy, even their enemies began to believe the same thing. The human wasn't here to win the war, he was here to end it. The war ended, not with a final battle, but with silence. Across the stars, Vindrax ships ceased transmission. Entire fleets powered down, drifting aimlessly into the void. Worlds once braced for siege began receiving surrender pings. There was no declaration, no treaty. Only one thing remained: the absence of their advance. The High Council didn't know what to make of it. There had been no final confrontation, no grand fleet engagement, no crushing blow to seal victory. The Vindrax simply stopped. Some said they had recalled their forces to regroup. Others believed they had turned on each other in desperation. But those who had watched, those who had studied the pattern, knew better. It was him. The human had shown them what defeat felt like, not just in strength, but in inevitability. In the terrifying realization that no matter how many ships they built, or how advanced their technology became, they were prey now. Being hunted. And so they ran. The Council sent envoys to the last Vindrax command sector, hoping for peace talks. What they found were abandoned stations, scorched landing pads, and databanks scrubbed clean. Not a single Vindrax remained. The war was over, but the man who ended it was nowhere to be found. He didn't return to the Council. He didn't broadcast a victory speech. He didn't claim a single reward or honor. His ship vanished from all long-range sensors 3 days after the Vindrax withdrew. No distress call, no trail. Gone. Some believed he had returned to the stasis vault, placing himself back into sleep until the next emergency. Others thought he had gone to the edge of the galaxy, to live in peace or solitude. But the oldest among. The Council said nothing. They simply nodded and remembered the warning from the old records. When you summon a human, you don't call a hero. You invite judgment. Galtoran rebuilt faster than anyone expected. Ships were salvaged. Trade. Routes reopened. The stars felt safe again. But there was something different now. A silence beneath the surface. A quiet respect. Or maybe fear. The galaxy had been reminded of something ancient. Something it had chosen to forget. And in the ruins of a shattered dreadnought, left untouched by time, one symbol remained scorched into metal. A circle with 2 arms crossed inside. The mark of Earth. The war faded into memory, its horrors softened by peace and reconstruction. Galaxies healed. Treaties were redrawn. Old enemies became allies. New generations were born into a time of prosperity, never having seen the darkness that nearly consumed everything. But the story of the human, the one who turned the tide, was never forgotten. They called him many things. The ghost of Thessar, the one-man armada, the final soldier. Some cultures revered him as a divine weapon. Others warned of him like a storm that could return at any moment. But no one denied what he had done. One being, one ship, and an enemy that folded like paper before his will. The Council debated whether to canonize his legacy, build statues, write him into the galactic records. But most agreed, to try and define him would only diminish what he truly was. Instead, they did one thing. They classified the Thessar 9 vault, marked it as off-limits, locked behind codes passed only to future generations of the Council, not out of fear that another human might rise, but out of respect for what that human had done. Every species, every system, every leader who survived the Vindrax War carried the same quiet realization. Humanity hadn't been erased from history. They had chosen to leave, to disappear, to wait, until the galaxy pushed itself to the edge of ruin, and only then had one of them returned, not for glory, not for power, but because someone had whispered their name in desperation, and a human had listened. That was their legacy, not in empires or monuments, but in restraint. In the terrifying knowledge that when the stars grew too dark and all other lights went out, there was still one spark left. Some say there are still a few humans out there hidden among the stars, watching, listening, waiting for the next great fall. Others believe that was the last of them, that the galaxy has been warned, once, and once is all humanity ever gives. No one knows for sure. But in dark moments, in shadowed command rooms and hushed meeting halls, when whispers of new threats begin to stir, there is always one phrase that brings silence to the room. One phrase that chills even the most powerful warlords. We could wake another one, and with that possibility, peace holds. For now.